So thanks everybody for coming to our open forum discussion. We've done one of these. We've had a few flow surgery events, but what else is we've had a guest on speaking. Tonight's Power Platform Governance with Emma Darcy. I'll give Emma a wee intro in a second. Before I start, it's just worth mentioning that you may have heard there's a Microsoft conference on this week, Microsoft Ignite, starting tomorrow. So we're all kind of buzzing about that. There's always some interesting announcements at Ignite as well. And also, we're quite pleased to announce that we're going to be presenting Microsoft Ignite, official Microsoft Ignite virtual power group viewing party, after party, on the 29th of November. So that's the next event that we're going to be planning. You may ask what a viewing party is or an after party is, but essentially one of the breakout sessions from Ignite, we view that and we have a bit of a discussion around that. So similar to the open forum events, that's why I thought it was quite a good fit. The opportunity came along. We're going to pick one of the breakout sessions from Ignite, watch it. I think it's about again 30 minutes long, and we've also hopefully got someone from Microsoft coming to join us as well. The idea is to get a kind of panel of kind of people around talking about some of the announcements at Ignite, in particular in that breakout session, drill into it and discuss what kind of impact that has on our daily lives as business applications professionals. The other announcement is 6th of December. Am I right in saying that, Damien? We're going to do it this month, but we'll start next month, first Monday in December. Flow surgery with Damien Bird. So he's got some big shoes to fill in Matt Collins-Jones. So go easy on him. But we're looking for suggestions for that flow surgery. I know he's got a few things in his back pocket that he can show us, but we really want your problems. So if you have any Power Automate issues you want us to have a look at, we can try and solve it together live in the flow surgery. So that'll be the 6th of December, first Monday in December. And then just tonight, we've got Emma Darcy joining us, dialed in from the States. Philadelphia, isn't it, Emma? Muted. You're muted. It's Philadelphia anyway. It's worth speaking to Emma. So I met Emma for the first time at Scottish Summit 2020. We've kind of brushed shoulders in passing around a few virtual community events, and then I kind of, again, brushed shoulders passing. She was starting her session. I was away doing something else, and I just kind of said hello. But that was also the pub quiz we were at afterwards, and I went on my own. And then Emma says, like, hey, Barry, come and join our team. And she invited me over to join our team. I just thought that was dead cool. So I'd like to thank Emma. And I also just wanted to emphasize that because now we've not been in the habit of going to like in-person events. And I just want to encourage that kind of behavior. If you see anybody sitting on your own at these in-person events, because we're out of practice now, then just give them a holler and just pull them over to join you. So thanks, Emma. And I'll just put that right over to you, Emma.
Great. Can you hear me?
Yes, we've got you. Yeah.
All right. Are we ready for me to kick off? I'm sorry, my team meeting is now, and it tried to put me into my team meeting, and I had to tell my boss that I couldn't be in the team meeting. So
I'm glad you missed that intro then, because you're probably blushed. So.
Okay. Well, we're gonna do something a little bit different today.
Cool.
Bear with me a second. I'm gonna share my screen. Okay. Things look a little madness. It's okay. They're supposed to. Let's do this one here. All right. And also, can you guys hear the soothing music in the background?
I can indeed.
Great. Is it too loud? I can never tell.
That's fine. We can hear it fine.
Great. And you can hear me too. Okay. Perfect. Now, I'm also going to turn off my camera because my face will be a distraction. So bear with me 1 second. I swear I'm normally more organized than this, but today I'm just ADHD brain and it's awful. Okay. All right. Here we go. I promise I'm a professional speaker. I have done this many times. All right. Okay. So Hello, everybody. Today we're actually going to be doing something a little bit different to normal presentations. If you attended Summit North America this year, this is the presentation that I gave then, but I'm going to be giving it tonight as well with a little bit of a twist because you guys can actually hear all the soothing music and see all the soothing images, which is fantastic. So, quick introduction to myself. If you haven't been to one of my presentations before, usually my presentations are very upbeat and very energetic, but I'm going to be slowing things down a little bit today. So if you hear me being a little bit quieter, a little less energetic than usual, I'm totally okay. We're just kind of changing things up a little bit. But my name is Emma Darcy, and I use she, her pronouns. I'm also a senior solution architect over at Hitachi Solutions, and I am based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, but originally from Ireland, if the accent wasn't an obvious giveaway. So when you think about governance, let's kind of kick things off and kind of lay out an agenda for where we're going to go today. When you think of the word governance in any kind of situation, Power Platform aside, kind of think about what thoughts and feelings does that word bring up. Usually it has very negative connotations, right? It kind of sounds like you're locking things down, you're being controlling, you're not letting anybody do what they really want to do. Do you start to kind of feel anxious, especially if you are an IT admin or you've worked in any kind of space of administration? Kind of thinking about dealing with end users or implementing something new can really be very anxiety ridden. It also kind of might make your blood pressure rise just a little bit. The thoughts of the extra hours in the office, having to set up the security models. Anybody remember those circles that you have to click multiple times to get them, the red, orange, yellow lines, etc. Yeah, a lot of anxiety in there. And governance really is a word that strikes a lot of fear into many different admins' minds. But actually today we'll kind of go through a little bit more of a soothing, relaxing guide on why it really does not have to be that way. So when we get to the core of what governance really means, it all really comes back to one particular idea, and that is creating a safe space for makers. And that's a way that allows our makers to create, build, and explore all the possibilities of the Power Platform, but in a way that doesn't really put any risk to the business. So when makers are given that space to build, when they're given the ability to create and design and innovate their own solutions, they really begin to nurture their own innovative ways, and we're able to do that without needing assistance from IT. And creating these safe spaces not only protects the business as our makers grow, it also allows our makers to feel confident and to develop their skills over time, knowing that while they're experimenting and learning, they're safe and anything that they do will not harm or impact the business in any negative way. Confidence is hugely, hugely important, especially in the early days of developing your makers. We must ensure that makers have the space and the resources they need to fully invest in the Power Platform. And one of the really great ways of thinking this is kind of going back to our childhood. And I did say at the start of today's session, we're going to be going a little bit off track. It's a little bit wild here on a Monday night. When you think back to when you learned how to ride a bike, so most of us learned how to ride a bike as kids. Did you learn how to ride a bike when you were growing up? And can you remember the different things that you needed to learn how to ride that bike? Did you have training wheels or stabilizers in place to support you? And hopefully you had a helmet as well to protect you if you fell. And did you have somebody there to also help you keep your balance? Also, do you remember the first time you fell off your bike when your confidence took that knock? Did you have somebody there to encourage you to keep going? The same thing really does apply to the Power Platform and to our makers. Without these supports in place, it's really difficult for somebody to learn how to ride a bike. Similarly, how it's really difficult for a maker to get up and make and learn how to develop and create in their own way. We have to provide that safe space for people to grow and to develop their skills on the Power Platform. We have to provide them with resources and encouragement that they also need when they run into a challenge. Why is it so important to ensure that our makers have safe spaces to grow? And we need to really think back to the basics. Think about your own organization that you currently are at. Maybe it's one that you own yourself, or maybe you work at a larger organization. But when you think about what the actual heart and the center of that organization is, or what does it actually need to sustain itself, everything's going to come back to people. Without people and without humans, we really don't have an organization or a purpose. So we need to be able to give people the ability to create and develop our own solutions. We really are at the center of every single thing that we do at an organization. And especially today, when we think about everything that's going on in the world around us, the demand for the most precious resource is really at an all-time high. When you think about even going to your local restaurant, for example, there's always signs everywhere saying people are hiring. It's really, really difficult to find and keep really good resources when it comes to the human population. So it is vital that we give our people and the people at the organization the tools that they need to automate some of the most monotonous tasks in their day-to-day lives. And we also give them the ability to focus on things that are innovative, things that really make their job worthwhile doing. And really, when you think back to it, there is no machine or no automation that can replace that innovative thinking. So we really, yes, we could, of course, we could go out and we could hire a developer to create these solutions that the individuals need. And we could purchase something off the shelf to solve a business problem, right? But when you think about the problems that you're trying to solve, who is it that knows what that problem is the most? And that's going to be the individual that's experiencing that problem or has that particular business need. So by giving the tools to that particular person to solve a problem, you're not only giving IT back their resources and time as they no longer have to deal with any of those problems, but you're also empowering and encouraging your people to develop and create their own solutions. And also when we start to allow our individuals to create their own solutions, we are doing some really great things on the IT side too. And one of the key things that we're helping eliminate, which you will never really truly eliminate, is shadow IT. So we no longer have people going out and downloading things that they don't need or downloading things that they think they need, and IT has no visibility on top of that. If we give them the tools to create their own solutions in their own safe way, we're kind of eliminating getting ahead of that particular problem. So when we provide a platform for people to create and build their own solutions, we're also empowering them to think outside the box and to innovate freely. When people no longer have the burden of working repetitive manual tasks, we improve morale and we allow people to grow and develop within the organization. And we really do allow them to reach their true potential. And we've seen this as multiple examples across the community. Empowering people to build their own solution does so much more for the organization. It also gives back time and resources to our IT departments. Before solution platforms, IT departments were always tasked with finding those solutions to the business problems. And then, of course, once that solution was found, usually after months of deliberation, IT were then tasked with implementing it. Do you remember those days when accounting would go out and buy some software that no one had ever heard of, and IT were the ones that were required to implement it and integrate it and train people and support it, etc. It was just madness. It became very time consuming to do all of those different things. And once that was done, and once we were also done with the training and support, it meant that IT were being taken away from supporting the actual core of the company, things that keep the business running. So knowing that our makers have those safe spaces to build that we've now put in place, it also puts IT departments' minds at ease and frees them up to concentrate on that critical infrastructure. By empowering people at every part of our business, we are freeing up our most precious commodity in the world today, which is time. But we're also allowing people to realize their full potential. And as I mentioned earlier, there are so many different examples of this, and many of you actually know these people. So for example, we all know our dear friend Keith Watling, who discovered the Power Platform while he was employed as a bus driver, and he actually used it to implement solutions at his organization. If you haven't met Keith or you don't know Keith, I highly recommend saying hi. His story is incredible, and he's a mastermind at his craft. But today, when you think about it, he's also a really well-known business applications MVP. And he's a really well-known leader within the Power Platform community. So that's just one example. I'm sure all of us have heard the example of Sumit as well over at Heathrow Airport. And if you haven't heard Sumit's story, I highly, highly recommend following it. There's a video on YouTube, definitely worth looking. It always makes me cry, so I don't want to play it today. But it's phenomenal to see how that one person was able to take that little bit of inspiration and to use the Power Platform to innovate so many different processes at Heathrow Airport that now actually impacts over 200,000 people on a daily basis that go through that airport. So by empowering people within the organization itself to create these business solutions, we're not only impacting the organization and the people at that organization, we're also impacting the people that that organization serves. So it truly is a very powerful tool. So now we know about the incredible benefits that the Power Platform can offer, and most of us are already pretty familiar with that. How do we create those safe spaces? It really is nice to be able to talk about this stuff and kind of say all these words and make it sound magical and easy. But when you get down to it, how is it that we actually create those particular safe spaces? And just like learning to ride that bike, we have to put in the support and protection in place before allowing our makers to explore. And one of the key pillars of talking about Power Platform governance is talking about environment structures. The first task really is to set up an environment that will be designated as your maker's learning spot. Typically, a lot of us will use the default environment, which comes with most of our Power Platform, not most, all Power Platform tenants. And this environment should really be made accessible to all makers, but it will have those guardrails in place. So our business data and our critical applications really need to be kept in a safe place while the makers are learning. And to create those guardrails, we need to look at what connectors are available within the environment. And then we need to start thinking about data loss prevention policies that ensure makers have the ability to create and build their solutions in a way that it doesn't feel restrictive. They still have the freedom, even though we're putting those guardrails in place for them. And there are many aspects of the Power Platform that can be used with most of the Microsoft licensing structures, but some might actually have additional cost. And that is another one of the concerns that a lot of organizations have when we talk about Power Platform. Yeah, we want to give people the space to create and build, but we also want to be really mindful of costs associated with that too. And again, our data loss prevention policies can be used to prevent access to any of those premium connectors. And of course, later on in time, as our makers have learned and developed and grown, we can give them access to those more premium connectors and those more additional costs if they give us a business reason or a business requirement as to why that's needed. So by creating the various data loss prevention policies and applying them to our initial safe space, IT admins will have peace of mind knowing that makers can explore and create without any risk to the business. Ensuring your makers are supported, especially in the early stages of adoption, is vital to the success of the Power Platform. If our makers run into a challenge they cannot easily get support for, their confidence and enthusiasm for the platform will be severely negatively impacted. So it's really important that we provide support in the early days anytime a challenge arises with a maker. And providing support in the form of training and community building will go a long way in adopting the Power Platform at the organization. So that all sounds lovely. How do we actually do that? Every successful Power Platform implementation is created around a core group of people who see the value in empowering makers. And traditionally, we would refer to this group of people as the center of excellence for the Power Platform. And they're usually designated as the owners of that platform. The Center of Excellence team should really comprise of not only our IT admins, of course, who know how things run, they know all the nitty-gritty bits and pieces of how everything happens, and they usually are the people administrating the platform overall. But it also has to include two other core groups of people at the organization. The first one being our business users. So when we think about the Power Platform and its purpose, it's there to help our business users create solutions to their business problems without needing IT involved or without needing to purchase development. So they really are the people who know what the problems are and know what can be done to solve them. So in order for the successful adoption of the Power Platform, we really have to include them in our core group of people. On top of that, we also need to include the people that are going to be your motivators. You're going to have people in there who evangelize the Power Platform. Those are going to be people who would be identified as probably your super makers, and typically you'll see them arise pretty early on in the Power Platform adoption. They're people who are building amazing applications or people who are going out and trying to find solutions by themselves. And when you start to spin up some toolkits to analyze the current landscape, you'll really quickly identify who those people are. They're going to be instrumental in training your makers and evangelizing the platform at a high level at the organization. They're also going to be people who are going to keep abreast of what's new in the Power Platform and help spread the word across the entire organization. So when we support and nurture our makers, we're going to cultivate that community of super makers, and they're going to inspire everyone at every level. one of the other things that's important is thinking about how to not overwhelm your new makers. So if you hand a maker a blank page, anytime, let's say you open up Power Platform Studio and you create a Canvas app and you start off blank, I don't know if you're like me, I have severe ADHD and that was evident today at the start of my presentation. But if you give me a blank template, I'm really going to freeze. I'm not going to know what to do or where to start. Your super makers are also going to be instrumental in help creating templates or help guiding your makers and where to actually start with the platform. And one thing you can do is also consider building out templates of apps, which is a really great thing to do. So if you have a bunch of apps that have been created at the organization that are really useful and could be implemented at other parts of the organization, I highly recommend creating a template of those that makers who are interested in learning about the Power Platform can download, play around with, customize, and learn how things work. I would also recommend showcasing these solutions too. So if you have makers that have created these great things, make sure that there's a big deal made of them. Make sure the organization knows who made this and what they made it from and what the platform is and how this can help other people at the organization. Supporting our makers also means teaching them development best practices. I think this is regularly overlooked when we talk about Power Platform. So remember, the majority of our makers likely do not come from a development background, right? So what might seem obvious to someone like ourselves who have developed solutions before, who have probably done some coding before, might not be super obvious to people who have not grown up or developed in that area. So it's important that when we teach our makers, we instill best practices from the very beginning, such as use solutions to develop your applications. We need to teach them about application lifecycle management. We need to also teach them about coding conventions, so to ensure that if we pass this app on to somebody else, we're not incurring technical debt and we know exactly what's happening with that application. So by doing this, our makers are speaking the same language across the board from the get-go. And it's especially important when makers start to graduate from creating productivity apps to more important apps that are going to support a larger workload. There is no wrong time to start implementing a governance strategy. This is really, really important. I've gone into a lot of organizations that are varying levels across their Power Platform implementation. And there really is no wrong time to start. Honestly, the right time is now. Before we implement, though, we really do need to have a very clear picture of what the current Power Platform landscape looks like. And every Power Platform implementation is going to be different, and therefore every governance strategy is going to be different. So for example, and this is true, some organizations might have 5,000 apps in their default environment and absolutely no strategy currently in place, no DLP policies, nothing. And that's totally okay. We can work with that. Other organizations might be just getting started out in their Power Platform journey and want to put the guardrails up first before allowing makers access. And that's totally okay too. I have seen so many different situations with organizations where they'll say, yeah, we're not using Power Platform, nobody's building anything. And then we'll install the Power Platform Starter Kit or the Center of Excellence Starter Kit, and we'll start to see, people actually have discovered the little purple Power Apps icon or the little blue Power Automate icon, and there actually are building things that you didn't know about. But regardless of where we're at with our Power Platform implementation, it's vital that we get that clear picture first. And without that visibility, you really cannot determine what's currently being built and who is building it. And also, if solutions have currently been built, we really have to have a good understanding of the importance of those solutions before we implement those changes. Because if we implement a DLP policy that stops a particular application from working, that application might be really critical to certain people's departments and their workloads. Once you have that clear picture of the landscape, we can start to formulate a roadmap that will allow us to crawl, then walk, then run. And from here, we can start to analyze the maturity level of the organization. And when I talk about the maturity level, I'm really referring to the multiple different pillars that come with the Power Platform Adoption Framework. So we can start to analyze the maturity level of security versus nurturing. And then once we have an understanding of the current maturity level and what's most important to us from a roadmap standpoint, let's say some organizations want to put an emphasis on security, whereas other organizations want to put an emphasis on the nurturing aspect. We can start to build our own roadmap to determine how we get from A to B. Oh, next screen. Thank you. So how do you build out that initial landscape? How do you actually get visibility over the platform? How can you tell what impact a DLP policy is going to have on an environment? And luckily for us, there are fantastic tools available that are going to help us in our governance journey. And many of us would have already heard of them. So we've already heard of the Center of Excellence Starter Kit, but for those of us who have not, I'm going to introduce you to the multi-tool, the Swiss Army knife, if you will, of the Power Platform governance world. The Center of Excellence Starter Kit is a suite of tools built by Microsoft and the Power Platform community, very important to remember that, to provide assistance to organizations implementing governance. At its most basic, it's going to give you visibility of everything that's being built on the Power Platform within that tenant, from apps to flows to connectors to bots, everything. And it's also going to show you what connectors are being used and what makers are actually making. So like most tools built by the community and for the community, it's also completely free to use, which is fantastic. Having visibility is at the core of the Center of Excellence tool, but really when you start to dig into what it actually is, it has so much more to offer when we talk about our governance journey. The tool also includes a suite of apps that are going to guide you on the impact a DLP policy will have on solutions in a given environment. And this one is really key if you are working with a client that already has multiple apps built but no governance strategy in place. It's a really nice little app that will show you exactly how a DLP policy will implement everything that's been built within that environment you're applying that policy to. It will also allow admins to bulk update permissions to apps and flows with the click of a button, which is going to save us a significant amount of time. Sprawl is always top of mind in any governance conversation as well, and the Center of Excellence Toolkit has a solution, of course, to assist us by allowing us to mark apps and flows for archival if they're no longer in use. So not only is this a massive time saver, it pushes the burden from IT to the maker to ensure that anything they're building for use is being maintained. Anything not being maintained will be archived. So that's another really key concept, is governance is giving back IT time and resources. So by pushing that ownership off of IT no longer have the burden of maintaining a lot of the apps that are being built. It really does reduce a significant amount of time in them. In fact, I believe a typical Power Platform landscape should really look like 80% of apps or solutions are built but for productivity or important reasons, and then 20%, a significantly smaller portion of things being built on the Power Platform, are actually critical. So it's important that we ensure that our IT departments are focused on that 20%. So it's also important to remember that the Center of Excellence Starter Kit is literally that. It's a starter kit, right? It's going to give you the basics to kickstart your governance plan. It's not a silver bullet. It's not going to fix all of your governance issues overnight. But like anything worth its weight in gold, it's going to take time to implement. This is another thing that I see with many organizations, is that if you are implementing the Center of Excellence Starter Kit, you have to treat it like its own project. And you have to give it the time, and you have to implement a plan to get things going. It's important to analyze what tools are actually needed in the immediate future, so such as your Center of Excellence core. And then if there are other things that are less important, like maybe the nurturing aspect is less important, ensure that those do get implemented, but maybe focus on your governance tools first. And again, remember, because it was built on top of the Power Platform, it's also completely customizable. So if the Center of Excellence Starter Kit does not do something that you need it to do, you can always customize it or make those modifications yourself. Another key point of governance is ensuring that we help our makers become self-sufficient. So when we go back to what that typical landscape looks like, we need to look at that 20% of apps that are deemed business critical. And a good governance plan should ensure that IT resources are focused on those critical applications. And usually those applications are significantly more complex in nature. The other 80% of applications consist of important to productivity solutions, which can and really should be managed by their makers and business units. So in order to shift that burden of supporting the entire landscape from IT departments to our makers, we have to enable makers to be self-sufficient. Our first step was creating those safe spaces for makers, which allows them to explore without needing support or guidance from IT. We also need to ensure that solutions are being built, are owned and managed by those makers. They are going to be responsible for the full application lifecycle management of the solution, and that includes support. Makers should be taught how and where to access support and educational resources, and also how to build in a way that is compliant with the standards set by the organization. And again, there are tools and resources available within the COE Starter Kit to help give our makers that visibility, meaning they no longer need a physical resource to review or advise on guidelines for app making. We also have tools available to us to automate any requests from environments. This is kind of where our licensing conversation starts to kick in. If a maker needs access to a specific environment or a specific connector, we can automate that request and ask some basic questions an IT admin would usually have had to ask. We can also make customizations to the Center of Excellence Starter Kit to track training and development so that only certain makers that have achieved certain training standards can have access to environments that are higher risk. And by providing those tools and shifting ownership of solutions to our makers, we create a community of makers that are self-sufficient and thus reduce the pressure in IT departments to support the entire Power Platform landscape. So what do we do with makers that have taken off their training wheels and they are building apps that are going to serve larger workloads? And how do we promote an app that was developed in a productivity environment to an environment that's going to allow for a better ALM process? How should we structure our environments when different categories of applications are being built? It's really important to think ahead for when these situations will arise and to be prepared as part of your governance roadmap. Start with the basics and think through the different categories of being built. Different categories of solutions that are being built. There we go. Productivity environments really should be few and far between. So we're going to break our environments down into 3 different categories. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. We're going to start with our productivity environments, and then we're going to move on to important environments, and then finally we have our critical environments. And this really is a very basic structure of categorization for your environments, and it allows you to bucket solutions according to their importance to the business, what kind of development cycle they need, and also the number of users that are being supported and the type of connections that are required. So our productivity environments, there really shouldn't be too many of those. They're going to be that initial safe space that makers are going to use to learn, test, and train in. And the applications built in these environments are going to have very few users, and they will likely have a minimal impact on the business if they go down. It's really unlikely that any applications built in these environments are going to need an ALM process, and they can be built in an environment containing multiple other productivity solutions. So usually there's not really much of an impact if these solutions interact with each other. Ownership of these solutions is going to be solely on the maker themselves. So very, very basic things, stuff that people are kind of training on, maybe their productivity, and they only impact one person or a small number of people. Our next category of our environments is going to be our important solutions. And these are going to be very much business centric and are usually built to solve a business challenge for a particular team or department of users. These solutions are being built by more experienced makers usually, and they might have a need for an ALM process. Typically, if these apps encounter an issue, it's not going to have a critical impact on a business as an overall, but it is going to cause somewhat of an inconvenience to its users. Access to developing these solutions should be managed by that department, and ownership of those solutions is with the makers and business units themselves. And finally, the last 20% that we've been mentioning, those critical solutions, they are always going to be managed and maintained by the IT departments. And these environments are going to contain solutions that are critical to the functionality of the organization. And they're going to make up, again, about that 20% of the landscape. There really should be a very solid ALM process in place, and access to development in this environment is strictly managed by IT. So by implementing an environment strategy here, we can now plan for when an app should be promoted from productivity to important, or maybe even from important to critical. It allows us to ensure ownership and control is with the correct department, and that the platform can be adopted at scale while managing very tight resources. Again, when we're implementing any form of governance, or really any form of change, it's really important to come back to the key reason why we're implementing the governance strategy. And again, this is for our makers and it's for our people. So when building your Center of Excellence team, remember for whom you are building the team out. Consider how changes are going to impact your makers of all levels and at every stage of your roadmap. It's important to recognize and lift up makers. Your super makers are going to be really key to evangelizing the platform and ensuring adoption across the business. Assigning various levels of responsibility for the platform across the Center of Excellence team is another recommended way of ensuring that people are kept at the heart of all of your governance efforts. Implementing a RACI chart can be really helpful and can have different levels of engagement with the governance roadmap. And finally, there really is no one-size-fits-all solution. This is really key to remember. Governance is going to look different at every single organization. What works for one is not necessarily going to be another fit for another. Maturity levels across various pillars of the Power Platform is absolutely going to vary. So again, while one organization might have their security policies locked down, they might be lacking a little bit in their nurturing endeavors. Your governance roadmap is also not a straight line, and it's going to consistently evolve in line with development and your makers' needs. It's important to have a consistent review schedule and ensure that your Center of Excellence team is keeping your makers top of mind. And that is my presentation for today. Hopefully the presentation you can see, while governance means a lot of different things to many people, it does not and is not an overwhelming task, and implementing governance should empower people to do more at organizations rather than restrict them. So we can also take the burden off of our overextended IT department. That is all I got for you today.